He said it during the vows. Not before. Not after. Not in the carriage on the way to the church, when there might have been time to stop it. Not the night before, when he had stood at his library window for 2 hours with a glass of brandy he did not drink, telling himself that he was doing the right thing, the honourable thing, the only thing available to a man of his word and his position. He said it at the altar, in St. Ather George's, Hanover Square, before a congregation of 200, in the precise second, after the vicar said, "Wilt thou take this woman?" and something in James Aldric Voss, Duke of Ravensworth, who had never in 34 years of life said a wrong thing at a wrong time, broke open without warning. He whispered it, so quietly that perhaps only she could hear. The woman beside him in white silk and seed pearls, holding her flowers with both hands because her hands were shaking. Constance. Beautiful. Accomplished. Society's great favorite. He was intended for 8 months. His father's choice. His family's expectations. The logical conclusion of every conversation about the ducal succession conducted in his presence since the age of 22. Constance Ashby, the elder sister, and he had just whispered, in the house of God, in front of 200 witnesses, that she was not the one he meant. He felt her go, still beside him. Not the stillness of someone who has not heard, the stillness of someone who has heard every word and is deciding, in the space of a single breath, what to do with it. The vicar continued. He was an elderly man, and perhaps his hearing was not what it had been. The sacred words fell through the incense-heavy air of St. George's, like stones into deep water. And James Voss stood at the altar and heard the echo of what he had just done spread outward through the church. He did not know whether anyone other than Constance had heard. What he knew was this. Across the aisle, in the third pew on the left, the younger sister sat with her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were forward. Her expression was the expression she always wore in public, composed, quiet. A woman who had spent 22 years practicing the art of occupying exactly as much space as was allotted to her, and not 1 inch more. He had not looked at her since he entered the church. He was looking at her. Now. The vicar said, "I will." James said, "I will." He heard himself say it as though from some distance, as though the voice belonged to a man who had made his peace with everything and was executing a duty. The word left his mouth and entered the record and became part of the legal and spiritual architecture of the next 50 years of his life. He stood in it as the choir rose around him. He thought, "What have I done?" The wrong sister. And the right one was sitting 12 feet away with her hands folded, looking nowhere in particular. Before we continue, kindly subscribe to this channel and like the story to reach others. Thank you wherever you are tonight. Stay with that word for a moment. Wrong. He said it was wrong. Not. I made a different choice. Not. I changed my mind. He said wrong, which means he knew. He knew, and he said it at the altar instead of before it. And that single word is the key that unlocks everything that follows. The year is 1817. The church is still singing, and everything is already broken. Let me tell you how it was made whole again. In Regency England, the system of arranged matches operated through a complex machinery of family reputation, financial negotiation, and social positioning. A duke selecting a bride was not selecting a companion, he was selecting a social alliance. The criteria were specific: the family's standing, the woman's accomplishments and comportment, the quality of her connections, the financial arrangement her family could offer. Personal preference, the question of which sister, which particular quality of mind or character, was secondary, expected to yield to necessity. A man who chose the wrong sister was not choosing against love. He was choosing against the system. And the system did not forgive this easily. James Voss met the Ashby sisters on the 14th of April, 1816, at a dinner hosted by Lord and Lady Pemberton, at which he had been placed, by some arrangement of the table he had not requested, between Lady Pemberton and the elder Miss Ashby. The elder Miss Ashby was Constance, 24, dark-haired, possessed of the specific social accomplishment that consists of making every person she speaks to feel briefly that they are the most interesting person she has encountered recently. She was charming in the precise technical sense. She produced a charm effect that had very little to do with what she actually said, and everything to do with how she looked while saying it. James noticed this quality. He also noticed that it was a performance. Because he was a man who noticed performances, having given so many of them himself across 34 years as the Duke of Ravensworth, he had been approximately half interested in Constance. In the cool way he was half interested in most things presented to him as appropriate, when something pulled his attention across the table. The younger sister was speaking. He had not been aware of the younger sister until this moment. She had been placed at the far end of the table beside a gentleman of middle age who was, from the quality of his expression, not a stimulating dinner companion. She was talking to him, not performing engagement, simply talking, and she was apparently telling him something about the drainage system of her father's estate in Wiltshire that was, from the attentiveness of the man's nodding, considerably more interesting than anything else he had heard at dinner in some time. James watched her for 3 minutes. He could not hear what she was saying. He could hear the tone direct, specific, occasionally producing a laugh from the gentleman that was the laugh of someone being surprised rather than entertained. He asked Lady Pemberton, as casually as he could manage, "Who is the young woman beside Harrington?" Lady Pemberton said, "That is Harriet, the younger Miss Ashby. Quite clever, they say. Though the family hopes for Constance to be settled first, she is the elder and very handsome, as you can see." He looked back at Constance. She was very handsome. He looked at Harriet, who was at that moment saying something that made Harrington set down his fork to respond properly. She was not handsome in the way Constance was handsome. She had the kind of face that improved with proximity and worsened with distance, because its best qualities required closeness to see the precision of her attention, the specific quality of her listening, the way her expression shifted when she encountered an idea she had not previously considered. He was separated from her by the full length of the table and the machinery of a dinner party that had already decided who he was sitting beside. He asked about the estate drainage the following day. He had his man of business look into it. The Ashby estate in Wiltshire did, in fact, have a significant drainage problem documented in the county agricultural records for the past 3 years. She had been correct. He attended 2 more Pemberton events that spring. At both, Constance was present and charming and entirely appropriate. At both, Harriet was present and specific, and had an opinion about something he found himself thinking about afterwards in his library at 11 o'clock, when he should have been reviewing correspondence. At the second event, a card evening, he had been close enough to hear her. She was explaining to a retired judge why a particular piece of agricultural legislation from 1803 had caused the very drainage problems that 3 subsequent pieces of legislation had tried and failed to remedy. The judge was not merely listening. The judge was taking mental notes. James stood at the edge of that conversation for 45 seconds before someone addressed him and pulled him away. He had 45 seconds with her voice. He thought about those 45 seconds with an unreasonable frequency for the subsequent 3 months. His mother said, in June, the Ashby family would be a suitable connection. Constance is a beautiful girl, with excellent manners. I have spoken to Lady Ashby, and there is receptiveness to your interest. James said, yes. He did not say, I am interested in the other one. He did not say it because Harriet was younger, less well-connected, less financially advantaged, and had no social claim that put her ahead of her sister in any conventional calculation. He did not say it because it was not the done thing, and James Voss had spent 34 years doing the done thing. He did not say it because he had not fully understood, in June, what he was feeling, and by the time he understood, in September, the engagement to Constance had been formally announced. He had chosen correctly. According to every rule available to him, he had chosen the wrong sister. An engagement in Regency England was a formal, legal, and social commitment with severe consequences if broken. A man who withdrew could be sued for breach of promise, a legal action claiming compensation for financial and reputational damage. More significantly, a broken engagement destroyed the woman's social reputation permanently. She was considered damaged goods, and her prospects for a subsequent match were severely diminished. A duke breaking an engagement was an extreme social rupture, rare, consequential, almost never done without a reason, catastrophic enough to justify the breach of promise action and the ruin that followed. James Voss's realization about Harriet was not, by the standards of 1816, such a reason. The 8 months of the engagement were the most precise form of private difficulty James had experienced in his adult life. He was not unkind to Constance. He was never unkind to her. She was charming and pleasant and managed the social requirements of being the future Duchess of Ravensworth with a competence he respected. He treated her with courtesy. He took care, every day, not to let anything he felt show, because what he felt was not something that could be permitted to show. Harriet attended 6 of the events during the engagement period at which he was also present. At none of them did they speak privately. They spoke in public, in groups, with the managed social distance appropriate to a man engaged to her sister. She was always composed. She was always precisely appropriate. She never gave any indication, none. Not in 8 months of careful observation that she knew, that she felt anything, that the situation caused her a single moment of the difficulty it was causing him. He watched her. He could not stop watching her. He watched her at the Harrington dinner in October address 2 completely different subjects with 2 completely different people across 90 minutes and be correct about both. He watched her at the Pemberton Christmas party correct a distinguished politician's misattribution of a speech publicly, flatly, without waiting to be thanked and move on before the man had finished processing that he had been corrected by a woman at a party. He watched her at his own engagement dinner manage the conversation of a table of 12 with the invisible efficiency of a general conducting a campaign that no one in the room knew was being conducted. Afterwards, in the carriage home, Constance said, "Harriet was very helpful this evening, wasn't she?" He said, "Yes." He said it in the careful, flat tone he used when he was containing something very large. Constance looked at him in the dark carriage and said nothing. He was never entirely sure whether she had not noticed or had simply decided not to pursue it. In January, Harriet's engagement was announced in the Morning Post to a Mr. Frederick Ellison of Hampshire, 31, adequate fortune, pleasant reputation, no particular distinction in any direction. James read it on Tuesday morning. He set the paper down. He sat in his library for 45 minutes without moving. He thought about Harriet telling a judge about agricultural legislation while he stood at the edge of the conversation with 45 seconds of her voice and chose not to cross the room. Then he wrote 6 letters, held 3 appointments, reviewed his estate accounts, and told himself 11 times across the subsequent week that this was correct. She would be well situated. The Ellison family was respectable. She would be happy. He believed this approximately 8 of those 11 times. The other 3 times, he sat with the specific weight of the choice chosen correctly, chosen wrong, and felt it in a way that had no useful application. He married Constance in March. At the altar, something broke. The period immediately following a Regency wedding was governed by relentless social performance. The ceremony was followed by a wedding breakfast, a formal luncheon at the bride's family home. After the breakfast, the couple departed for the honeymoon. The social world expected the new Duchess to be presented in the weeks following their return. The first months of a Regency marriage were, therefore, the most public. A constant display of domestic happiness that left very little space for private difficulty or honest conversation. Constance had heard him. He knew she had heard him because of the way she had moved during the final prayers. A slight stillness, a quality of held breath, the specific physical response of a person absorbing information they did not expect and cannot immediately process. It was the response of a soldier hearing a shot, not the response of someone hearing nothing. She had said nothing. Through the register, through the walk down the aisle, through every one of the 200 congratulations that fell on them at the wedding breakfast like warm autumn rain. She had smiled and thanked and received and performed with the specific competence she brought to everything social, and she had not looked at him directly once. In the carriage, late that afternoon, heading toward Ravensworth Park in Surrey, She said nothing for 43 minutes. He counted them. Then, "You said something at the altar." He looked at the window. Surrey in March was the specific brown of a thing that is not yet what it will become. "Yes," he said. "I heard it." "Yes." "Harriet doesn't know," Constance said. "I need you to tell me that first." "She doesn't know," he said. "She has never known." A silence. The carriage wheels on the Surrey road. "Did you choose her first?" she said. "In your own mind. Before you chose me." He could have lied. He was a man who could lie when it was required, who had, in some sense, been lying for 8 months by choosing correctly and saying nothing. He could have given her the answer that would make the next 50 years less complicated. "Yes," he said. "I chose her first." Constance looked at the countryside. The March light was thin and cold and entirely indifferent. "But you chose me," she said. Not a question. "Yes," he said. "I chose you. I have made that choice, and I will honor it completely." "Why did you say it?" she said. "At the altar. Not before it. Not after it there." He thought about this honestly. "I don't know," he said. "In 34 years I have never failed to contain what I was feeling at the moment I was feeling it. I cannot account for it. It came out because it was too large to keep in," she said, almost clinical. "That is the usual reason." He looked at his wife. She was looking at the window. Her profile was beautiful. She had always been beautiful, and her expression was the expression of a woman conducting an internal accounting she intended to complete before she said anything further. He had the sudden and specific recognition that he had married someone he had not fully seen. "I am going to be your duchess," she said. "I intend to be a good one. I am asking for one thing in return." "Name it." "She can never know," Constance said. "Whatever you feel. Whatever you have felt. She goes into her marriage knowing none of it. You will not seek her company, arrange proximity, or look at her the way you were looking at her in the church. She is going to be happy." "Yes," he said. "Promise me," she said. For the first time her voice fractured barely, a hairline crack in the even surface of it. "Promise me she stays happy." "I promise," he said. Constance nodded. She looked at the window until they reached Ravensworth Park. He kept the promise for 8 months. In Regency England, marriage was a woman's primary means of securing her future. A woman who married a man of good income and reliable character was considered settled and fortunate. Emotional dimensions were secondary. The expectation was that affection would grow from proximity and shared life. Harriet's match with Ellison was, by every conventional standard, an excellent one, but within the intimacy of a small village church, with the Duke of Ravensworth present among the witnesses. The story contains a scene that would change everything, even though no one spoke a word of it aloud. Harriet Ashby became Harriet Ellison on the 1st of May, in the village church near the Ashby estate in Wiltshire. She had wanted this church because she knew the vicar, and because in May the morning light through the east window came in a particular shade that she had loved since childhood. James attended with Constance. They were the most prominent guests and were treated accordingly. He had spent the 8 months since his own wedding mastering the performance of not looking at a specific person. He was good at it by now. He looked at the vicar, at the east window, at the way the light came in the shade. Harriet had evidently anticipated with enough precision to choose this church for it. He was aware, with the peripheral awareness of a man who has trained himself not to look, of where she was in the room at all times. He did not look at her until the vows. He looked then, because not looking would have been conspicuous. She wore white muslin, simply cut. A single white flower in her dark hair. She said the words love, honor, obey, in the clear, even voice she used for everything she meant. Ellison was a good man. His expression when he looked at her was the straightforward regard of a man who had made a decision he was fully confident in and was executing it with uncomplicated pleasure. James looked away. Walking out of the church, Constance said, very quietly, "She looked well." "Yes," he said. "He seems like a good man." "Yes." "A beat." "James," she said, "I know it is difficult. I'm asking you to be quiet. Of course, he said. She took his arm. They walked to the wedding breakfast. Harriet was placed at the far end of the table. She laughed twice during the meal with the real laugh, not the social one, the actual one, the one that arrived without announcement. Both times James heard it from across the room. He did not look. This was, he acknowledged to himself, the best he could do. He was not proud of it. But it was what he had. The letter came on a Thursday, addressed to the Duchess, from Mrs. Frederick Ellison. Harriet had delivered a child in December. A boy. Both mother and child were well. The Ellisons were very happy. And the child's name was William James. Constance read it alone in her sitting room first, then brought it to breakfast. He read it once. He set it down. He picked it up and read the name again. He said nothing. Constance watched him across the table. Frederick's father's name is James, she said very quietly. Frederick James Ellison. He set the letter down. He said, "Of course." He picked up his newspaper. This was the moment, not what he said, but what the silence around it contained. The silence of a man who had thought, for one unguarded second, that the name meant something about him. The silence of a woman watching the second happen and choosing to close it rather than open it. Constance said, "We should call when she is recovered. It would be proper." "Yes," he said. Behind the newspaper, "I am not asking whether you want to," she said. "I am asking you to be a duke when we call. Can you do that?" He lowered the newspaper. "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then, "The child will grow up," she said quietly. "She will bring him to events. This is what the next 30 years look like, James. I am asking you to look at it directly." "I know," he said. "Then manage it." He did not tell her that the managing was the difficulty, that management implied distance, and distance had failed him once before, at an altar, in a sentence that escaped without permission. He did not tell her this, because she knew it already. He wrote to Ellison that afternoon, 3 lines, correct and warm, congratulating him on his son. He sealed the letter. He looked at his own hand with the seal. He thought, this is what the promise costs. He posted the letter. Social, calling in Regency. England was a formalized system, governed by strict rules. The visitor presented their card, was received or not, based on whether the household was at home, and the length and quality of the visit communicated the nature of the relationship. 30 minutes was standard. A duke and duchess calling on a new mother was a significant social compliment. It indicated the connection was valued and maintained. It was also, in this specific situation, the most carefully managed 30 minutes of James Voss's life. The Ellison house in Hanover Square was a good house, comfortable, well-appointed, the house of a family that managed money sensibly. The drawing room was bright and warm, and recently reorganized around the presence of a small person, a cradle in the corner, a stack of small clothing on a chair, a letter half-written on the writing desk, in a hand James recognized from 11 years of watching her write. Harriet received them. She looked, and he knew he should not be noting this. But he noted it regardless well. The year of marriage, the months of expecting, the December birth had given her face a quality it had not previously had, something more inhabited. The expression of someone who has moved further into themselves rather than being hollowed out by circumstance. She was more present than she had been. The quality he had observed at dinner parties, the specific attention she brought to things, had deepened. He noted this in 4 seconds, then directed his attention to a point above her left shoulder, which was the compromise he had developed. "Constance," Harriet said. "Your Grace, how very kind of you to come so promptly. We wanted to come as soon as was proper," Constance said, and kissed her sister. "How is he?" "Entirely perfect and very loud. Frederick assures me this is a sign of excellent health. I have decided to believe him on the grounds that the alternative explanation is worse." The baby was produced. James held him, because it was required, for approximately 90 seconds. The baby regarded him with the focused equanimity of someone who has recently arrived from elsewhere and is still assessing the situation. "He is very like his father," James said. "So everyone says," Harriet said. "I cannot see it yet. I think he looks like himself." He looked at her then the first time in 8 months. He had allowed himself to look directly at her in conversation, and it was a mistake, because she was looking back with the direct, clear attention she gave to everything. And for one unguarded moment, he was standing at a dinner table in April 1816, watching her make a judge set down his fork. And he had chosen Constance anyway. And here they were in a drawing room in 1818. And there was no version of any of it that helped. He said, "He has your eyes." Constance's hand tightened fractionally on his arm. "He has gray eyes," Harriet said. "Everyone's eyes are gray at this age." "Not like that gray," James said. He heard himself say it, and stopped. The room was briefly a different temperature. Harriet looked at the baby. She did not look up. "We mustn't tire you," Constance said, her voice perfectly calibrated. "I want to hear about the christening. Shall we have tea? And you can tell me everything?" The conversation redirected with the precision of a woman who has been redirecting conversations her entire life. James said nothing further. In the carriage, silence for 6 minutes. Then, James, "I know," he said. "You cannot do that. I know. She has a husband. She has a child. She is happy. If she ever suspected, if she ever understood, it would put a question in everything she has built. I will not let that happen." He looked at his wife. And this was when he truly began to understand what he had married. She had been carrying this for 12 months. The knowledge of what he felt, the daily management of it, the constant work of protecting her sister from something she had every right to resent. She had done all of it because she loved Harriet, and because she had decided quietly, without telling anyone, that the marriage was going to be worth having. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know you are," she said. "That is precisely what makes it so difficult." She looked at the street and did not say the rest of what she was thinking. He looked at her profile and began, for the first time, to wonder what it cost. What Harriet knew, and had known since the morning after the wedding, was exactly what a woman of her precision would be expected to know. She had known, since April 1816, that the Duke of Ravensworth looked at her with the specific quality of attention that precedes something. She was not naive. She had noticed it at the Pemberton dinner, had noticed it, filed it, and moved on, because there was nothing practical to do with the information. She had also noticed, in September, that he had announced his engagement to Constance, which was the correct choice by every available measure. And she had agreed with the correctness of it in the quiet, rational part of herself, and let it rest there. She had chosen Frederick Ellison in January because he was a good man, who wanted her specifically, and said so directly, with no sister more suitable standing nearby. He had said, "I want you, Harriet, not as a compromise or a consolation. I want you particularly." She had found this, in her current situation, the most valuable thing anyone had said to her in some time. She had been in the third pew, at St. George's, when James Voss married her sister. She had not heard what he whispered. She was 12 feet away, and the choir was preparing, and the acoustics of St. Math. George's were better for music than for whispers, but she had seen his face. In the second after the vows, before the choir rose, she had been looking at him, one of those moments of involuntary attention that are only noticed after the fact, and she had seen his face in the exact second when he looked across the church, at her, for 3 seconds. His expression had been the expression of a man standing in the worst possible place in the world, understanding it completely. She had looked at her hands immediately. She had thought, "I did not see that. There is nothing to have seen." She had held this thought effectively for 8 months. Then in February, a duke had held her son, and said "not like that gray," with a particular quality in his voice, and she had felt the air in the room change. She thought about it for 3 days. She walked in the Hanover Square garden with William, in the morning of the 3rd day, and she looked at her husband's house and thought, Frederick chose me first and last and only, and has never once looked across a room in the specific way of someone who is making himself not look. She went inside. She put William in his cradle. She sat down at the writing desk. She wrote to her sister. Private letters between women in the Regency period were not as private as their writers might have wished. Letters were frequently read by household staff or by husbands who had legal access to their wives' correspondence. A letter between sisters, delivered by hand, bypassing the post entirely, could achieve a reasonable degree of privacy. Harriet's letter is not the letter of a woman who does not know what she is doing. It is the letter of a woman who has decided the only way to protect something is to name it precisely, address it directly, and close the door before it can open further. The letter arrived by private messenger on a Wednesday morning, addressed to the Duchess. Constance read it in her sitting room, with the door closed. She read it once. She read it again. She sat with it for 15 minutes. Then she went to find James. He was in his study. She came in without knocking the first time in a year she had not knocked, and put the letter on his desk, and stood at the window while he read it. The letter said, "Constance, I have been thinking carefully about something and I need to say it directly, because you have always dealt in directness, and I think we owe it to each other now. In February, at the call, I heard something in the way he spoke about William's eyes. I am not asking you to confirm anything. I am not asking for an explanation. I am telling you that I heard it, and I have thought carefully about whether I heard correctly, and I believe I did. I need you to know that it changes nothing. Frederick is my husband. William is my son. The life I have is the life I chose, and I have not spent one day of it in regret or doubt. I am telling you this so that you understand. I am not waiting for anything. I am not hoping for anything. I am not carrying anything that needs to be carried. What I am asking is whether you are well, whether you are being treated well, whether there is anything about your marriage that you have been carrying alone that you should not be. That is what I want to know. Not for my sake, for yours. Because you are my sister, and you have always managed things quietly, and I think you have been managing this particular thing quietly for longer than is fair. I love you. I am well. Tell me you are well." James read it to the end. He set it on his desk. He looked at his wife, who was looking at the street. "She knows," he said. "She may have known since the church," Constance said. She turned from the window. Her expression was the one he had come to recognize over the past year. Managed, precise, containing something large that was not going to be put down in front of him. "She is asking whether I am well. What will you write back?" "The truth, which is, that I am well, that the marriage is what it is, that I am glad she is happy." A pause. "What about me?" "This is a letter from my sister asking about my welfare," she said precisely. "It has nothing to do with you." He looked at the letter. He looked at his desk. He looked at his wife. "Constance, James, I said something at the altar." "Yes," she said. "You did. I should not have." "No," she agreed. "But you did. And we have been living with it since. And Harriet will continue to be well, and Frederick will continue to be a good husband, and William James will grow up. And none of them will have the quality of their happiness reduced by something I refuse." Her voice was steady. On refuse, it acquired a specific weight. To let reduce it. He stood. He crossed the room. He did something he had not done in a year of this marriage. He stopped managing his distance from his wife and simply stood in the room with her, close enough that the space between them was the space between two people who have been in the same house for a year and have not yet learned to be in the same room. "What do you need?" he said. He said it the way he said things when he was not managing them plainly. She looked at him. It was the first time in a year that he had used that tone with her, and she recognized it, and he saw her recognize it. "I need you," she said, "to be here. Actually here. Not at the dinner table containing something. Not choosing correctly. Here. In this marriage. With me. Is that something you are capable of?" He was quiet for a long moment. He thought about Harriet, who had written, "I am not carrying anything that needs to be carried," who had named the thing precisely and closed the door herself to protect her sister. He thought about Constance, who had known since the carriage on their wedding day and had done the daily work of protection for 12 months without being asked, without credit, without once in his presence saying, "This is what it costs," he said. "I chose the wrong sister at a dinner table in 1816. I have been living with that choice correctly ever since. I want to ask you whether you are capable of something too." "What? Can you let me try to choose correctly now? Not because it is the done thing, because I am standing in front of you, and you are here, and what you have just asked for is something I am actually capable of providing if you will let me." Constance held his gaze for a long time. She picked up the letter from his desk. She went to her sitting room to write back to her sister. She did not answer with words, but she left the door open. The first time in 12 months. In Regency England, a successful marriage was measured almost entirely by external standards. Social standing maintained, heirs produced, domestic order sustained, no scandal generated. The internal quality of the marriage, whether the couple understood each other, found the other worthy of genuine attention, was a private matter the world had no stake in and no mechanism to support. What James and Constance build in this chapter is something the Regency world had no language for: the intentional construction of a marriage that was worth having. This was rarer than it should have been. It required specific work. This is what that work looked like. It began, as Constance had said it would, with the door left open. He came to find her that same evening. Not to discharge an obligation to sit in her room because she had asked a direct question and it deserved a direct engagement. He sat in the armchair across from her writing desk, and they talked about the estate accounts, which led to her family, which led to a piece of music she had been studying for 3 months, Clementi, a sonata he had not known she had returned to seriously since girlhood. He said, "You play seriously." She said, "I play seriously when I am thinking about something I cannot resolve any other way." She said it without looking up from the page she was annotating. He said, "What have you been thinking about?" She looked up. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has just been asked a question they did not expect, from a direction they were not expecting. She said, "Whether the Pemberton dinner on Thursday is something we actually need to attend, or whether we could, on this particular occasion, simply not attend." He said, "We could not attend." She said, "We could not attend." They did not attend the Pemberton dinner. Lady Pemberton would talk about it for 3 weeks. Neither of them cared in the slightest. Over the weeks that followed, he discovered things about his wife that a man who had been standing at a managed distance for a year had not known. He discovered that she was funny. Not witty in the social register. She had always been witty in the social register. It was part of the performance. Genuinely. Specifically. Quietly funny in a way that arrived without warning. He discovered it at a dinner in April, at which a guest he found tedious launched into a lengthy account of his recent improvements to his estate library, which involved 17 minutes on the subject of a ladder that was also a bookcase. The ladder, the guest explained, folded in a particular way that he had designed himself, and which had required 3 different carpenters to execute. James was composing an expression of polite interest that he had used successfully at many dinners. Then Constance, beside him, said very quietly, intended for only him, "I do hope he patented the folding." He made a sound that was not appropriate for a dinner table. He converted it with some speed into a cough. Constance looked directly at her plate and was entirely expressionless. He looked at her. He thought, "I have been standing in the same room as this woman for 14 months, and I missed this entirely." He said later, in the carriage, when the constraint of public was removed, "I hope he patented the folding," she said. "I have been sitting next to that man at dinner events for 6 years, and I have thought it at every single one." He laughed. He had not laughed, in a conversation with his wife, since the dinner at which he had married her. He had not known that was true until he was doing it. He discovered she was lonely. He discovered it not from anything she said, but from the particular quality of her face one evening when her mother and 2 of her sisters arrived unexpectedly for tea and stayed for 3 hours, and she was, in their company, entirely differently. Herself, looser, quicker, more of everything. When they left, she stood in the hall and watched the door close, and her face had the expression of someone watching something move away from them. He had been in the study, technically, but the door was open. She had made a practice of leaving doors open between rooms. and he had understood the message, and made a practice of sitting close enough to receive it. And he had seen her face in the hall. He crossed the hall. He stood beside her. They could come every Thursday, he said. If you wanted. I will be at the club on Thursdays. She looked at him. Her expression was the expression of someone receiving something they had concluded was not going to arrive. You do not like your club, she said. No, he agreed. But I like going to it on Thursdays now. She looked at the door her family had left through. Then she looked at him. James, she said. That is very... She stopped. She started again. Thank you, he said. It's Thursday. They might as well come. She laughed. Just for a second, the real one arrived without announcement, and then she composed herself and went back to her sitting room. He went back to the study. The door between them remained open. In August, he told her he was in awe of how she had managed everything. She said, Don't be in awe. Be available. Awe doesn't help. He said, Available. She said, Present. Actually present. Not managing the distance between us. Here. He said, Yes. And tried, every subsequent day, which was not the same as succeeding every day, but was the work, and the work was worth doing. Harriet's reply took 3 weeks, which was longer than usual between sisters, and Constance understood without needing to be told. When it came, it said, I am glad. I am very glad to hear what you have told me, and I am going to believe it completely, because you have never in your life told me something you didn't mean. I want to tell you something in return, and I want you to receive it correctly and not spend any time worrying about it. I love my husband. I love my son. I love the life I have chosen. I am telling you this not because I need you to believe it. I know you believe it, but because I need you to understand that what I felt in 1816 was a real thing that existed and ended when he chose you. Real things that end do not damage the things that come after them. They are just things that were real. I am going to ask you to do one thing. Stop protecting me. I am not fragile. I am not waiting. I am not a problem that needs managing. I am your sister, and I am well, and I would like you to be well too, which means I would like you to stop carrying things on my behalf. You chose James. He chose you. Whatever was true at a dinner party in 1816 is past. What is present is that you are my sister, and I want you to be happy. And I think you are actually capable of it if you stop making yourself responsible for preventing a harm that has already been prevented. Come and see William. He has learned to sit up and is very pleased with himself about it. Constance read the letter at breakfast. She did not show it to James. She read it twice. She folded it and put it in the small locked box where she kept the letters she intended to keep. At dinner, she said, Harriet replied. Is she well? She is very well, Constance said. She looked at him across the table. She asks whether we will come to see William. He has learned to sit up. Do you want to go? Yes, she said. I want to see my sister. Then we will go. She looked at him. James, she said. I have been thinking about your question. From February. Which question? Whether I could let you try, she said, to choose correctly now. He was very still. I think, she said slowly, that I am already letting you. I think that is what this year has been. I think I did not understand that until Harriet told me to stop managing it. He said, She is extraordinary. She is, Constance said. Then, clearly, so am I. He looked at his wife. He looked at her the way he had not been looking at her for a year, the way he had been reserving, with a discipline that had finally failed him once, for someone he was not permitted to look at. Yes, he said. You are. Constance lifted her wineglass. Her expression was not performing anything. It was simply her face, receiving something it had been waiting for. Come and see William, she said. And be a duke when we call, and be a husband when we are home, and let us see what we are capable of. The concept of a marriage, successfully rebuilt two people, actively choosing each other after a difficult beginning, had no formal vocabulary in Regency England. Society had language for the external performance of domestic happiness, regardless of internal reality. What James and Constance have built by 1820 is something the Regency world would call an adequate marriage from the outside, and something considerably better from the inside. The Regency world was not always the most accurate judge of what was happening in its houses. William James Ellison was 3 years old and had, as advertised, learned to sit up, and subsequently to stand, and subsequently to run directly at things at the greatest possible speed, with no particular regard for the consequences. He had his mother's eyes. The gray was confirmed now. Not the universal gray of infancy, but a specific, clear gray, entirely his own. And his father's build, and his father's complete unconcerned confidence in the world around him. He had also developed, over 4 visits, a particular attachment to the Duke of Ravensworth, which manifested as a willingness to sit on the Duke's lap and deliver lengthy opinions on horses, dogs, the inappropriateness of his afternoon nap, and a bird he had observed on Tuesday that he was confident represented a species previously unknown to science. James listened to all of it, with the full attention he had been learning, for 2 years, to give to things that deserved it. Harriet and Constance sat together on the garden bench at the Ellison house in Hanover Square, in the spring sunshine of 1820, and watched their husbands with William. Constance had told Harriet in February that she was expecting. The news had been received with the specific quality of Harriet's joy, warm, genuine, entirely without complexity, the joy of a woman who has no ambivalence whatsoever about good things happening to people she loves. Sitting in the garden now, Harriet said, "Are you happy?" It was a question she had not quite been asking for 3 years. Constance watched James let William climb onto his shoulders, which was undignified for a duke, and which James was permitting with the expression of a man who has concluded that dignity was costing him more than it was worth. "Yes," she said. And then, "He is trying. I think that is the most honest thing I can say about it. He is trying in a way that is not performed. That is the best kind," Harriet said. Yes. They watched William attempt to reach a low-hanging branch from the Duke's shoulders and miss by 6 inches. He was not deterred. He tried again immediately. "And you?" Constance said. "Are you happy?" "Yes," Harriet said. "I have been happy, genuinely. I need you to believe that." "I believe it." A pause. "Do you think Frederick knows?" Constance said. "About what was true in 1816. "No," Harriet said. "He knows I love him. I think that is what matters." "Yes," Constance said. "I think that is exactly what matters." James set William down on the grass. Ellison caught him before he ran directly into the rosebush. The garden was filled with the particular sound of a 3-year-old who has been briefly airborne and considers this entirely insufficient. Constance stood. She walked across the garden. She put her hand in James's. He looked at her. He looked at her with the attention he had been learning. The actual attention, not the diplomatic kind. "He is very determined," she said, watching William immediately regroup for another attempt at the branch. "Yes," James said. "He is exactly like his mother." Harriet, on the bench, heard this. She looked at the garden. She looked at Frederick, who had caught their son from the rosebush and was now holding him upside down by the ankles as William had apparently requested, which Frederick was doing because William had requested it, and Frederick did the things William requested whenever they were not dangerous. She looked at this and felt the warmth of it as a fact. Her husband, her son, her garden, her life, she thought. Real things that end do not damage the things that come after them. They are just things that were real. She had always believed this. The believing of it was the work, and the work was worth doing, and the garden was warm and William was laughing and Constance had her hand in her husband's hand, and everything that had been broken at an altar 3 years ago had not been repaired. Repair meant returning to what was before, and what was before had never been right. It had been built into something else entirely, something that required the breaking to make. Here they all were in it. Here they all were. James and Constance and Harriet are fictional. The world that made their choices for them is not. In Regency England, the system of arranged marriages was not merely a social convention. It was a legal and financial infrastructure determining the distribution of property, title, and social capital across generations. A duke choosing his bride was making a decision with consequences for estates, tenants, family alliances, and succession lines. The pressure to choose correctly, to choose according to the system's criteria rather than personal preference, was not merely social, it was structural. The women who navigated this system did so in the only available register, quietly, with the specific competence of people who have learned that their preferences are secondary to the machinery they live inside. Constance's achievement protecting her sister from knowledge that would have destabilized her happiness, while simultaneously building a marriage that was genuinely worth having, is not the achievement the Regency world would have named or credited. It is the kind of achievement that belongs to the women who kept the social world running, quiet, competent, unremarked upon, and extraordinary. Harriet's letter, "Real things that end do not damage the things that come after them," is the sentence this story was built to contain. It is the most honest available response to a situation that the Regency world had no better language for. The grief is real. The life built after it is also real. Both are true simultaneously. The work is to hold both without letting one erase the other. James chose the wrong sister at a dinner table in 1816. By 1820, he had chosen correctly. It took him 4 years, 2 extraordinary women, and a 3-year-old who was entirely certain he had discovered a previously unknown species of bird. Some choices take time. The important thing is that they are eventually made. If this story reaches you, kindly subscribe to this channel and like the story to reach others. Thank you if you were at the altar, or in the carriage, or in the April garden with your hands folded. Tell me where you are listening from. I want to know. And if you know someone who needs to hear that real things that end do not damage the things that come after, share this with them. Tonight, it is for you.